Sara Johnson is the Executive Director of Global Economics in the Economics and Country Risk Business Unit at IHS Markit. In this role, she helps clients assess worldwide business and financial opportunities and risks. Sara co-authors the Global Executive Summary, manages the Executive Strategy Council, and presents the Economic Outlook to international conferences. Thank you, Sara. Steve Grande. Steve Grande is the owner of Meridian Industrial Group, a Holyoke-based company that was recognized during 2019 as a Manufacturer of the Year by the Massachusetts Legislative Manufacturing Caucus. Meridian machines parts for military and aerospace contractors. Those products include components for Patriot missiles and rockets used to deliver satellites. Thanks for being here, Stephen.
Thank you.
Dr. Emily Reichert is CEO of Greentown Labs of Somerville, the largest hardware-focused clean tech incubator in North America. Greentown provides 100,000 square feet of prototyping lab, office space, and event space to entrepreneurs building products to address society's biggest climate and environmental challenges. Greentown has incubated more than 230 companies that have together created 6,500 jobs and raised more than $750 million in funding. Thank you so much, Emily. So before we begin, let me just stress that this is a conversation rather than a lecture. We want to welcome and encourage everyone to step up to the microphones and ask your questions, offer your comments, and any of the challenges throughout this discussion. As I said, there are going to be microphones throughout the room. I'm going to start off by asking Sara that now that we're a full 10 years into an economic recovery, some observers expected a recession in 2019, but the economy remains steady. What signs are you looking at to set the direction for 2020? And that's a big question. Okay. So.
Well, IHS Markit is known for its PMI indexes, and we certainly focus on those based on in-depth surveys of a broad spectrum of business organizations across the world in 40 countries or so. And this morning we got some very good news out of Japan and the UK. Less encouraging out of Europe. That economy is growing at a very marginal rate. If you look at the US, the indicators are positive. We're seeing kind of renewed strength in manufacturing output and orders. Export markets are looking a bit better. If you think about 4 or 5 months ago, when there was great concern about a recession, that was the point at which the US was imposing new tariffs on China. China was retaliating. We now have phase 1 of a trade agreement. It doesn't address a lot of the problems, but at least we're moving in the right direction. I think the outlook for the US economy is very favorable, but it's a mixed picture globally. We see very limited growth in Europe and Japan. Emerging markets are a mixed story with considerable weakness in Mexico, Argentina, and some of the other Latin economies. Solid growth in China, but in the midst of a deleveraging process, which means slower growth progressively over the next few years. So on balance, we see global economic growth stabilizing at a pace of about 2.5% in the year ahead, and perhaps improving a little bit by 2021.
Thank you. I'm going to sort of ask that same question to you, Stephen. Just as a manufacturing company, what do you see are the signs for 2020 as a manufacturer in Holyoke?
You know, I kind of have this view, a sort of rising tide raises all boats, and you know, manufacturing has grown for several months now across the country. the unemployment is low. In my business, you know, defense spending's important. I have this sense that Massachusetts will always get its opportunities because of our universities and our colleges, not the least of which are our community colleges, which are, I'm on the board of trustees at one of the Springfield community colleges, and they're engaging in with people in the community to bring more people into the workforce. So I feel I'm really encouraged by where Massachusetts is going, and the national economy, which affects our business.
Okay, and same thing to you, Emily. You know, you're in the environmental space. You're really growing companies, no pun intended, really growing companies who want to be in the environmental space. What are you seeing at the signs in 2020?
Well, I'd say I kind of sit in the epicenter of the momentum around clean technology development here in the Commonwealth. And it is actually very exciting for those who may have seen the State of the Commonwealth a few days ago, that Governor Baker announced a 2050 net zero goal for Massachusetts, committed us to that. Now, goals are very important. We need to figure out how we actually get there. So there's two pieces to that. But subsequently, the Senate came out with the same goal, and the Speaker of the House has also said that he is signing on to that goal. So that was a big move forward that we just made in the last really like 48 hours in terms of clean tech, climate, our leadership in this area. And frankly, that's only going to build the momentum of this industry in 2020 and beyond. Just to say a little bit more about Greentown Labs. So as was mentioned, we have startup companies that we support. These companies tend to be working in the environmental clean tech space, which to us means renewable energy, but it also means energy storage generation, transportation, water innovation, agriculture. So it's a really broad set of technologies, all of which are going to be required to help us think through how we're going to reduce our emissions over time. And so Greentown supports companies that are between maybe 2 people up to 40 people is our biggest one, and all of them have that common mission of both wanting to make a profit, which of course is important to business, but also having a secondary mission, which is also important in terms of having a greater impact. And so of these companies, we are trying to think really broadly about how we support the companies that we need to address the climate challenges of the future. And in that, this net zero emissions goal is very important in terms of setting a North Star. It's telling entrepreneurs from around the world that Massachusetts is the place where you can come and build a company that is going to have an impact on what is really the greatest challenge of our time. And so it's a very exciting couple of days. I'd say the other thing that's been very exciting to see over the past couple of years is the movement of the offshore wind industry into Massachusetts, and there are a number of different offshore wind companies who are members of AIM, including Ørsted, Mayflower, Vineyard Wind, and Equinor. We are already have awarded 800 megawatt projects to 2 of those companies, and we'll have more of this coming in the future. But these companies are really going to be here, build supply chains that are going to involve many manufacturers in Massachusetts as this industry scales. But we are going to be first. The first utility scale solar or offshore wind energy project is going to be built off the coast of Massachusetts. And that is very exciting and just another sign of the momentum that we have here in our state for clean tech, environmental, and climate-related technology.
Great, thanks, Emily. And that really speaks to what John talked about in his remarks, that there are a diversity of businesses in this state, and we've got to be willing to bring them into AIM. So, you know, Emily, we'll be chatting with you after this, see if we can engage them in the mission of AIM. Sara, I wanted to go back to you. You are the vice chair of the AIM Board of Economic Advisors and the AIM Business Confidence Index, which ended on a high note. How significant is employer optimism in 2020?
It is significant in that employer optimism is based on fundamentals. You're not optimistic unless the financial environment and the environment for your customers is right. In December, the AIM Business Confidence Index increased to 62.2. And to put that in perspective, 50 is stability, 62 is very robust growth. And what impresses me is that month after month, the rating of Massachusetts surpasses that of the nation. So our AIM membership really gives an endorsement to the Massachusetts economy. I think given the demographics of the state, however, it's probably not realistic to expect the state to outgrow the economy. The latest data point we have is the third quarter, when Massachusetts' real GDP grew at a 2.2% annual rate. We think we can maintain that pace through 2020. We will continue to see some job growth, but labor supply is a constraint. And last year, the population grew just 0.2%. That is kind of surprisingly weak. So we're certainly watching the supply side of the economy, but right now the demand side looks good, and that is driven nationally by consumer markets. Consumer finances are in a very good state, particularly with the rise in equity prices and home prices. Household balance sheets are looking very strong. So that, combined with solid job growth, is driving consumer incomes and spending. So that's really the key to success in both the state and national economy.
Excellent. I'm going to turn to you, Steve. You have established a highly successful manufacturing business in Holyoke, one of the first planned industrial cities in the country. Can manufacturing, taking off of what Sara just said, can manufacturing again be an economic anchor of the gateway cities?
Boy, it would be great if it could.
Yeah.
There are assets in the gateway cities. I mean, at one point, those cities were manufacturing centers, right? There's infrastructure there, there are people there, there's transportation there. The collaboration that goes on, I know in Holyoke, I think the ingredients are there for that to happen, but there's challenges. I think gateway cities across the state, the population there participates in the labor force at somewhat lower levels than the state average. And Holyoke in particular is well below the state average. So there's challenges to bringing manufacturing to the gateway cities, to Holyoke. But I think that what's happening, the conversations that are taking place, the collaboration between the vocational schools, the community colleges, the local and state legislators, I think, we have these conversations all the time, and it seems like that we're not making progress. But the conversations have to take place, and we gradually move the needle. So I do think that there's an opportunity for some of that to come back in these gateway cities. Manufacturing struggles a bit because it's a learning curve to start. You start training, you need to get experience somewhere. The folks in the population in the gateway cities have trouble getting out to where the manufacturers are to gain that experience. And I think that's a problem. I interview people on a regular basis that come through some of the different state-sponsored programs, and by and large, that transportation issue always comes up. So I'm optimistic that the needle's moving in the right direction, but there's a lot of challenges to getting manufacturing back into cities like Holyoke.
Yeah. I think one of the best examples, of course, I'll refer back to Interstate Electrical. Fantastic apprenticeship programs, and we're seeing a lot of them around the state. That's a great way to get people involved. So,
That's a key.
Yeah, it is totally a key.
and I've only been, I bought this business about 10 years ago. We celebrated our 10th anniversary in September, and since I have gotten involved in manufacturing, I've gotten more involved in these discussions regarding training and the apprenticeships. We do need to get back to that. That at one point was kind of standard operating procedures in the country, right? Were apprenticeships. Interstate is a big company compared to a small company like mine, so it's a little bit difficult for a company that's, we have 23 employees. 80% of manufacturers across the country they employ 20 or less employees. It's not easy to bring an apprentice into our facility and take people who are productive every day and make them somewhat less productive so that they can train. And now we do it, and it certainly is valuable to that to the candidate who does come in. And the schools are constantly, the vocational schools are constantly trying to engage local businesses so that they can send people to their facilities. But it's, we, businesses of 20 employees, we are focused on kind of the day-to-day activities of our business. So right. There's a challenge there as well. I mean, a company like Interstate, it's terrific.
Yeah. Shout out to them again. Emily, I was going to ask you.
Could I add on to
Please.
What Steve was saying? So for those who may not know, Greentown Labs about 5 years ago now founded a program in partnership with the Massachusetts Manufacturing Extension Partnership, or Mass MEP for short, Mass Development, to connect manufacturers in Western Massachusetts with startups in Eastern Massachusetts, because both regions have their individual strengths. We're really lucky in this state to have amazing advanced manufacturing capabilities right here in our state. And what we realized working with entrepreneurs in the Boston area is that they had no idea this even existed. And so over the last 5 years, we've built a program where we're making connections. We work with about 270-ish manufacturers who are all interested in working with startups. And over that time, we've made over 1,000 connections. It's resulted in hundreds of contracts between manufacturers and startups. And so I think what that highlights is that there's really an opportunity for different aspects of the strengths of our states to be working together in partnership to kind of lift us all up, to pick up some of the themes of John's speech. The other thing I would mention is that there's a real opportunity, I think, for manufacturing when you look at what's going to be happening with offshore wind. Down in Fall River and New Bedford, where there's that new offshore wind port to be the starting point for that whole new industry, there is going to be a ton of supply chain that's going to need to be built up in that area. So that's a whole new opportunity that's being created by environmental, climate, and the state's goals in that area. And finally, I think another important thing to realize as we're trying to, a big problem for manufacturing in Massachusetts that I know of is the talent problem, right? Getting students excited about something that they may know or their parents may know about manufacturing as being a thing of the past, when really it's the thing of the future, right? It's all computerized and it's very exciting. But how do we get them excited about it? What if we're connecting manufacturing and what they want to do? Millennials want to have a huge impact. Can we get them engaged in doing manufacturing for the next generation of technology that's needed for our energy transition? And so I would throw that out there. I think many manufacturers in Massachusetts are already supporting that in some way, but I think that there's a real opportunity to connect the talent, get the talent excited about working in our industries in Massachusetts, and it's yet another opportunity for us to lead.
Thank you for that, Emily. I wanted to get back to you, Steve, though, because outside of Meridian, you chair the Holyoke Mayor's Industrial Development Advisory Committee. So what, in your view, then, is the future of manufacturing in Massachusetts?
You don't have any easy questions to ask me?
I was just going to echo.
Okay, an easy one. How's business?
I mean, business is terrific. Again,
Good.
I go back to my view. I'm impressed by how Sara and Emily are so, they have their finger kind of on the pulse of a lot of different things. As a small business out in Western Mass, again, I go back to that view of a rising tide raises all boats. I see what's happening across the country. I see the collaboration that goes on, the conversations. I'm involved in the conversations that go on in this state. I see our terrific education system here, our colleges, our universities, our community colleges. I see the president of the community college that I serve on. I see him out in the community, engaging companies, understanding what companies are looking for. I think that the future of manufacturing in Massachusetts is terrific. It's a little bit different than what I'm engaged in on a daily basis. This innovation economy, this Internet of Things. I'm not quite even sure what the heck that is, to be honest with you.
Neither am I, to be perfectly honest.
But I'm encouraged that our legislators are, they're engaged with our business community. I have conversations with our local legislators all the time. Senator Lesser, who chairs or co-chairs the manufacturing caucus. So I think the ingredients are there. I think Massachusetts is very well set up to get those opportunities. I do worry a little bit about some of the headwinds, some of the, the cost of energy out this way, healthcare. Those are all things that impact my company, though we're fortunate to be in Holyoke where electricity is relatively cheap. I'm concerned about the issues with, the gas, the supply of gas in our state. So there are a lot of different challenges, but overall, my business is doing well because I believe Massachusetts is doing well, and our national economy is doing well.
So one of the things that I'm sure we've all noticed in the news lately is everybody's talking about go west. There's housing out there. There are jobs out there. Trying to not be so Boston Central or Greater Boston Central. Go west. There's growth there. And I'm hearing that from you. So I'm hearing you really talk about manufacturing in that way. How many people in here really think about that as a way to solve or grow your business? I mean, we talk about that at AIM board meetings. We want people to be more thoughtful about the businesses that are in the western part of the state. I think it really does, it's really important, especially in the green space. Goodness, you got the Berkshires, you've got everything out that way. Emily, can you talk a little bit about the work that's going on environmentally?
In terms of what Greentown works on, we, as I mentioned, have a program that is about helping the manufacturers and startups to connect with one another. And really, what is so needed whenever you have early stage startups is that they need a lot of different things. They need space, they need community, they need money, but they also need expertise. And they need expertise really around how to raise money. They need expertise around how to do partnerships, because most of the companies we work with in clean tech are going to be manufacturing something at some point. And so they need to also know how to build something. And so that is really, I think, where the kind of nexus of how clean tech and environmentally oriented tech and addressing our climate challenge all overlap with the expertise and strength that we have in Massachusetts and Western Mass around manufacturing. And so, as I've mentioned, we have taken advantage of that for years. We know the strength and we cultivate it, and we work with manufacturers. We bring them to Boston. We do tours where we actually take busloads of people to Western Mass and introduce them to manufacturers and do plant tours. And the conversations that get sparked and the new ideas that are shared, whether it's a more like a mom and pop machine shop or someone that's doing light volume manufacturing for our startups, they need everything in between in order to get their companies to a point where they can be invested in and be big enough to graduate out of the incubator and generate more jobs and grow here in the Commonwealth. So I think there's endless opportunities to do that.
Can I ask Emily a question?
Sure.
Are these startups, are they staying here once they get established? They're staying in Massachusetts?
So the really cool thing about incubators is that statistics show that over 80% of companies that go through an incubator in a current location end up staying in that location. So I'd say even our rate is even higher than that. I'd say it's probably more like 95% of companies that get started in Greentown Labs end up staying and building in Greentown Labs. And our secret trick is that if we can help them build their manufacturing supply chain here in Massachusetts, we make Massachusetts stickier. And so that's something that we're very actively pursuing. So when we set them up with you, they don't want to leave working with you because they build a trusted relationship. And so that's the type of thing that we try to do for our startups. It's good for them and it's good for our state.
Excellent.
You know, we recently started driving cars out in Western Massachusetts.
Hey, thanks, Stephen. Okay, does anybody have a question? We're going to open it up. Yes, ma'am. Oh, is that you, Brooke? Who's back there?
Hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Donna, and thank you to our panelists. I'm Brooke Thompson from AIM. I had a question. There's been a lot of talk about cost and growth, and so I'm wondering if you could identify one or two costs that are really, from your perspective, impeding right now all of what you're discussing about the growth and the potential we could see in the sectors. What are those things right now that are impeding that ability to reinvest and grow and expand? You can identify just one or two.
I'll say for me in the area that people that we support is high rent. Rent is the number one, high rent and lack of availability in the places that people actually want to continue to build their companies after Greentown Labs. You know, that just the craziness of rent, and I'll just give one example. In Somerville, Massachusetts, we landed there in 2013. We were renting for $8 to $10 a square foot of light industrial space. That property, 14 buildings, abandoned plant, was worth $5 million. 2 years ago, it sold for $80 million.
Oh, my goodness.
Cash.
Oh, goodness.
So you can imagine, you can't have too many startups graduating out of that situation into a property that they can afford. So it's a real problem to have actual real estate that folks can access. So that's the number one cost for us.
Can you talk a little bit, Sara, about what you see on a national level as it relates to manufacturing and what some of the challenges that you're seeing?
Well, certainly it's international competitiveness. And I also worry about kind of the trend towards more and more protectionism. What we've seen so far hits primarily intermediate goods and business equipment. So the net effect is that the tariffs are being absorbed by our businesses, and really when they're intended to improve competitiveness, in many situations they're doing quite the opposite. I think energy is, you mentioned that, I think energy is certainly a concern in Massachusetts because down the road we will need more supply of natural gas. If we're going to reduce carbon emissions, natural gas is a much better alternative than coal. So the near-term solution has to be to bring in more natural gas. Labor supply is certainly a concern with the state unemployment rate now below 3% and the national unemployment rate edging down towards 3.5%. So I would expect that we would see some acceleration in wage rates and labor costs nationally in a country that's already relatively expensive.
Yep. Thank you. Any question?
Hi there. I'm Tim Leshin from Northeastern University. Thanks very much to the panel. And I'll just offer that if you want to learn more about the Internet of Things. We have a new Internet of Things Institute.
We should go together.
That train has left the station. I'm too old to learn about that.
I wanted to expand. There was a lot of conversation about educating the workforce. And there was some mention of higher ed, but we think about education as a lifelong learning activity as opposed to simply training one person to go into one field. And I wonder if you can think about and talk about how higher education can assist in terms of responding to this workforce need across the continuum, because I'd also argue that all of our jobs are going to get disrupted because of AI and robotics coming up. And so we need to be thinking across the continuum, not just at the manufacturing level.
You go ahead, Steve, if you can address the AI question.
Well, I think that, I think there's things that are happening that need to be happening. It's, dual enrollments for high schools and colleges, articulation agreements between community colleges and the four-year institutions, and these on and off ramps so that they're not looking at manufacturing as an either-or type thing. There is the opportunity to move in and out of either the industry and to go on and get further educated, or to go into a program at one of the universities or the community college and be able to jump into the workforce, and then still be able to go back into, for further education. And companies can help by covering some of the costs of that, certainly. So I think those things are happening, and I've seen my company benefit from just that thing.
Okay. Another question?
How you doing? I'm Dan Rivera, Mayor of the City of Lawrence. Just two questions. One for Emily. Space in Lawrence is the rent is down. And my elevator pitch is you can live in Andover, build your business in Lawrence, and get a morning tea time in southern New Hampshire. The mayor of Boston's not here, right? Or the governor? All with no traffic. I'm just saying. But on a serious point, if you could, if three things that a municipality can do to make itself more attractive to a business in the green space, I'd love to hear that. And secondly, as an aging industrial city, the idea of onshoring of manufacturing to Sara, is that a real thing happening? And if so, can places like Holyoke and Springfield and Lawrence, are we hoping against hope, or is that a real thing happening?
You want to start with Emily?
Sure. So I actually know that we have had the program I've been talking about to connecting manufacturers with startups is now spun out of Greentown Labs and called Forge. And I know Forge would actually like to set something up in Lawrence. So maybe I will send them along to you. In terms of the manufacturing space that could be available in Lawrence, 100%. This is kind of, as our companies grow, they need larger and larger spaces. And okay, they don't want to leave Somerville, but they kind of have to. So would love to have a partner in helping to understand, what's available, and maybe there's someone that I can work with on your staff about that.
Is there something specific that they're looking for that we should do?
I think you have it. I think what you have specifically is the space that allows you to do light industrial work. I mean, I haven't spent that much time in Lawrence, but I'm imagining I spent more time in Lowell. It seems like there is a lot of probably mill building type space, and that's kind of what startups need to build stuff.
Great, thanks. And Sara, did you want to address the question of onshoring?
Well, I think the amazing technological improvements in manufacturing will result in more onshoring. In industries that are more labor intensive, I think the shift will be out of China but into other Asian countries. So we'll see kind of robust growth in Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, for example. So yes, there are opportunities.
Right, okay. Question right here, John.
To your point earlier about connecting eastern Massachusetts with western Massachusetts, recently in the business pages of the Globe and other areas, there's been a lot of discussion about the improving the rail link from west to east and back and forth. And I'm wondering what the panel thinks about how vital that would be to improving manufacturing and business in general in the Commonwealth.
Right, that's a great question. Who wants to take that? Do you want to take that one, Stephen? If not, we
I
can
mean, I've
pass.
certainly given some thought to that.
Yeah.
I think it obviously would bring Boston closer to Western Mass. Does it mean that more manufacturing companies will open up businesses in Western Mass? I don't know about that, but I think what would likely happen is it might open up the workforce, the opportunities for residents in Western Mass, maybe even some of these gateway communities where they are underserved and they're not participating in the labor force as much as the rest of the state. So I think it certainly has that potential. Now, how do you build it? And, you know, the costs involved there, I'm not 100% sure, but on the surface, it looks like it would be a benefit.